My stepfather shot me and left me for dead in the remote family cabin. So I signed for help to a deaf stranger, a 3-star general who set a trap my stepfather never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of pine and old paper was the only thing that felt right. I'd been at my mother's cabin for 2 weeks, surrounded by the stillness of the forest and the weight of her absence. At 26, I felt more like a widow to my own life than a daughter sorting through an estate. The task was monumental. As a historical archivist, I was uniquely qualified to handle the stacks of letters and journals, but the emotional toll was exhausting. A persistent migraine had anchored itself behind my right eye for 3 days, and a wave of nausea had me curled on the sofa, a cold cloth pressed to my forehead, when the sound of a heavy engine rumbled up the gravel drive. My heart leaped. No one was supposed to be here. This cabin was my sanctuary, miles from the nearest town, shielded by a dense wall of hemlock. I sat up, the sudden movement making the room spin. Through the window, I saw Christopher's silver luxury sedan, a car that looked offensively out of place against the rustic log cabin. Christopher, my stepfather. The man who had married my mother when I was a teenager and who had, in the 6 months since her funeral, become a cold, calculating stranger. I cracked the door, keeping the chain latched. "Christopher, what are you doing here? I told you I needed time." He was already on the porch, wearing a pressed suit that looked absurd in the wilderness. He was 52, but his obsessive grooming and expensive tastes made him look sharp, like a polished blade. He didn't smile. "Freya, we need to talk. Open the door." "I'm not feeling well," I said, my hand trembling on the knob. "Whatever it is, it can wait. I'll be back in the city in a week." "It can't wait." His voice was flat, devoid of the false charm he'd always used. He pushed against the door, and the chain groaned. "Open it, Freya, don't be difficult." Reluctantly, I slid the chain free. He strode past me, his expensive cologne instantly polluting the smell of old books and cedar. He glanced around the living room, his eyes lingering on the boxes I'd so carefully organized. "You're still sorting this junk? I thought you'd be done by now." "It's not junk, Christopher, it's Mom's life." The migraine throbbed. "Why are you here?" He turned, his face a mask of impatience. "The estate. The lawyers are ready to finalize the sale." "What sale?" My blood ran cold. "We're not selling the cabin. Mom was explicit. This place stays in the family. It's mine." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your mother was sentimental. I am practical. I've got a buyer offering 7 figures for this entire tract of land. It's enough to clear our debts and set us both up." "Clear your debts, you mean?" I'd overheard his hushed, angry phone calls before I left. He was in financial trouble, deep trouble. "The answer is no, Christopher. This cabin is not for sale. It was my mother's dying wish." "Dying wishes don't pay bills." He stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just greed, but desperation. A terrifying, hollow void. "You need to leave," I said, moving toward the phone on the wall. "I'm not signing anything." "Oh, you will." He pulled a thick sheaf of papers from his briefcase and slapped them on the rough-hewn coffee table. "You'll sign, or you'll regret it." "Get out," I shouted, my voice cracking. I grabbed the phone receiver. He moved faster than I could have imagined. He wasn't aiming for the phone. He backhanded me, a stunning, sharp crack that sent me sprawling over the arm of the sofa. My head hit the floor, and the world exploded in white-hot static. "You stupid, sentimental girl," he hissed, standing over me. "Your mother spoiled you. She left this mess for me to clean up, and you are in the way." Through the ringing in my ears, I heard a metallic click. My vision swam, but I forced my eyes to focus. He was holding a small, silver handgun, not a hunting rifle like the ones mounted over the fireplace. A sleek, personal, intentional weapon. "Christopher, no," I whispered, terror paralyzing me. "It's a tragedy," he said, his voice eerily calm, as if reciting a script. A grieving daughter, alone in the woods, overcome with sadness. A terrible accident with one of her father's old firearms. The police will find you in a few days when I report you missing. He raised the gun. I scrambled backward, crab-walking toward the back door, my limbs refusing to obey. Please don't. The sound was deafening in the small room. It wasn't a bang, but a sharp, pressurized crack. I felt tea before I heard it, a searing, unbelievable pain in my side, just below my ribs. It felt like being kicked by a horse and stabbed with a hot poker all at once. I gasped, but no air came. I looked down. A dark, crimson flower was blooming with impossible speed across my gray t-shirt. Christopher looked at the gun, then at me, his expression one of mild surprise, almost annoyance. He was planning this. He came here to do this. He walked over to me, nudged my leg with his polished shoe, and watched me bleed. You should have just signed the papers, Freya. He turned, picked up the phone, and ripped the cord from the wall. He tossed it onto my legs. Then, he walked out the front door, leaving it wide open. I heard his car start, the crunch of gravel, and then silence. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the wet, rhythmic drip of my blood onto the hardwood floor. I was alone, miles from anyone, bleeding to death. The betrayal was worse than the pain itself. The first minute was pure shock. The cabin, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a tomb. The pain in my side was a living thing, a hot, coiling serpent that took my breath away with every shallow gasp. I pressed my hand to the wound, and the warm, sticky wetness that coated my palm sent a new wave of panic through me. It was so much. Too much. No, 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 no. I whimpered, the words barely audible. I tried to push myself up, but a fresh bolt of agony shot from my ribs to my shoulder, and I collapsed back onto the floor, my cheek pressed against the cold, dusty wood. Christopher had left the front door open. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It felt like a mockery. He was gone. He'd shot me and driven away, leaving me to die. He thought I was finished. He thought I was just like my mother, too soft, too trusting. I lay there, my vision tunneling, the edges of the room blurring into a hazy vignette. I thought about my mother. I thought about her journals, the ones I'd been reading all week, filled with her worries about Christopher's ambitious projects, and his talent for spending money we don't have. I closed my eyes, and for a second I let the darkness pull at me. It would be so easy to just stop, to let go. Then a flicker of pure, undiluted rage cut through the fog. He would not win. He would not take this house, this land, this memory of her, and sell it to cover his own failures. He would not erase me. I forced my eyes open. I had to move. The phone line was cut. My cell phone? Where was my cell phone? It was on the kitchen counter, charging, 10 feet away. It felt like 10 miles. I gritted my teeth, tasting copper. Using my elbows, I began to drag myself across the floor. Each movement was a fresh hell, the wound in my side screaming, leaving a slick, dark trail behind me. It took an eternity. My breath came in ragged, wet pants. By the time I reached the kitchen cabinets, I was shaking violently, cold sweat mixing with the blood. I reached up, my fingers fumbling, and clawed at the counter's edge. I managed to hook the charging cable, pulling it. The phone clattered to the floor, just out of reach. I sobbed, a raw, choking sound, and lunged for it. My fingers closed around the smooth glass. I thumbed the power button. The screen lit up. No service. Of course, the cabin was a notorious dead zone. I always had to walk to the end of the driveway to get a single bar. There was no way I could make it that far. Defeat washed over me, cold and absolute. I was going to die here, on my mother's kitchen floor. But as I lay there, my gaze drifted past the phone to the kitchen window, which overlooked the dense woods at the back of the property. And I remembered. My mother had always called him the hermit, a reclusive neighbor who lived on the next tract over, almost a mile through the trees. We'd only ever seen him from a distance, a solid, gray-haired man walking his dog along the ridge. The property line was marked by an old, dilapidated stone wall. A mile, I couldn't even stand. But then I remembered something else. Something my mother had told me years ago when I was complaining about the isolation. "We're not totally alone, Freya. We have a neighbor, a very decorated, very private man. He's deaf, you know, from the war. That's why he likes the quiet." He was deaf. I looked at my hands, my bloody, shaking hands. My great-aunt, my mother's sister, had been deaf. Growing up, my mother had insisted we all learn to communicate with her. I wasn't just conversational in American Sign Language, I was fluent. It was a language I hadn't used in years, a skill that felt dormant, useless. Until this second. Christopher knew I was an archivist. He knew I was quiet and bookish. He knew I loved this cabin, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know about Aunt Clara. He didn't know that my useless hobby was the one thing he couldn't account for. He had forgotten one crux. I'll thing. The thought was a tiny, hard ember in the frozen landscape of my fear. A mile, through the woods, to the stone wall, to a deaf stranger who might not even be home. It was impossible, but it was the only chance I had. I shoved the useless phone into my pocket. I looked at the back door, just a few feet away. I pressed my entire forearm against the wound in my side, a makeshift pressure bandage, and began to crawl. The pain was blinding, but the rage was clearer. I would not let him win. I would not die. The forest floor was a nightmare of damp leaves, sharp twigs, and exposed roots. Every inch was a new discovery in pain. I'd made it out the back door and into the trees, driven by the single, desperate image of the stone wall. I was moving on pure adrenaline, my vision flickering in and out of focus. The world was reduced to the patch of ground directly in front of me. Crawl, drag, breathe. Stop. Crawl, drag, breathe. With every agonizing pull, my mind flashed back, not to the shooting, but to the years before. To the life Christopher had built on my mother's generosity. I remembered the day he'd married her. I was 16, and he was all smiles and expensive gifts. He was a real estate developer, he'd said, building the future. He charmed my mother, who had been lonely for so long. He'd taken her on trips, bought her jewelry, and slowly, expertly merged his life with hers. My mother, a kind, trusting soul, had been blinded by the attention. I, the quiet, watchful daughter, had always felt a chill. His compliments felt rehearsed. His interest in my studies, my hobbies, felt like data collection. He'd ask about the cabin, the land, the family assets, all under the guise of making sure you and your mom are taken care of. My mother's sacrifices had been immense. She'd put her own career on hold to raise me, and after she met Christopher, she'd poured her inheritance, my grandparents' money, into his foolproof ventures. "We have to support him, Freya," she'd say, her brow furrowed with a worry she tried to hide. "He's under so much pressure. These deals are very complex." Now, crawling through the mud, my blood painting the ferns, I saw it all with horrifying clarity. He wasn't a builder, he was a parasite. He had drained my mother dry, and when she'd gotten sick, he had been impatient. Respectful and doting in public, but resentful in private. I'd seen the way he checked his watch in her hospital room. I'd heard him on the phone with creditors, promising a significant liquidity event as soon as the unfortunate legal matters were settled. I was the last unfortunate legal matter. A branch snagged my shirt, ripping the fabric and tearing at the wound. I screamed, a thin, watery sound, and collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak. The world tilted. I was so cold. My hand, pressed to my side, was numb. I was losing too much time, too much blood. How long had it been? 20 minutes, an hour. I pushed myself away from the tree and saw it, through a break in the foliage, not more than 50 yards away. The stone wall. My hope flared, giving me a last, desperate surge of strength. I half crawled, half stumbled the remaining distance, my legs dragging uselessly. I reached the wall, a low, moss-covered barrier that separated my mother's land from the hermit's. I scanned the property. It was cleaner than ours, the underbrush cleared. A small, neat log home stood on a rise, a thin plume of smoke rising from its chimney. He was home. But he was inside. How could I get his attention? I couldn't yell. Even if I could, he wouldn't hear me. I saw movement. A side door of the house opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a full head of thick, silver hair. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, and he was carrying a basket of firewood. It was him, the hermit, Kyle Wallace. He turned his back to me, stacking the wood against the side of the house. This was it, my one chance. I pulled myself up, using the wall for support. My legs buckled, but I locked my knees, leaning my entire weight on the stones. I was exposed. If Christopher had come back, he would see me instantly. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my ravaged side. I raised my left hand, my right still clamped over the wound. I waved, a frantic, desperate gesture. He didn't see me. He finished with the wood and turned to go back inside. "No," I cried, the sound barely a whisper. I did the only thing I could. I picked up a rock from the wall, a small, sharp piece of granite. With the last of my strength, I threw it. It sailed in a pathetic arc, landing on his metal roof with a loud, sharp clang. He stopped instantly. He spun around, his eyes scanning the woodline. He was alert, his body coiled. He wasn't a soft old man, he moved like a soldier. His eyes swept the trees, and then they found me. He froze. He saw the blood, he saw the desperation in my face. He started toward me, moving. With a speed that belied his age. I didn't have time. I could feel the darkness closing in. As he ran, I lifted my trembling left hand. I forced my numb fingers to move, to form the shapes. HELP. He was closer now, his face a mask of grim concern. SDPFATHER. He was 20 yards away. His eyes were locked on my hand. SHOTME. He reached the wall as I finished the last sign. I saw the instant understanding in his eyes, the flicker of professional, cold fury that replaced his shock. My legs gave out, and I pitched forward. He vaulted the wall in one smooth motion and caught me before I hit the ground. He scooped me up as if I weighed nothing. His arms were like steel. As he ran me toward his house, I buried my face in his flannel shirt, the world finally going black, and let go. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the beep of a machine. My first thought was that I was dead. My second was that the afterlife was surprisingly sterile. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white and unfamiliar. I was in a bed, not my own. An IV line snaked into my arm. The pain in my side was no longer a searing fire, but a deep, throbbing, heavily managed ache. I was bandaged, tightly. "You're awake." I turned my head. Kyle Wallace sat in a chair beside the bed. The room was a guest bedroom, simple but immaculately clean. He wasn't wearing the flannel shirt, he was in a crisp polo. He held a small whiteboard and a marker. He wrote on the board and held it up. "You are safe. I am Kyle. You are in my home. I am a retired Army medic. I have treated the wound. The bleeding is stopped." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. Thank you," I rasped. He nodded, his expression kind but serious. He wrote again. "The bullet passed through. It missed your vital organs. You are extremely lucky, but you have lost a lot of blood." He pointed to the IV bag. "Saline, you need a hospital, but the storm." I listened. For the first time, I heard it. The howl of wind and the lash of heavy rain against the windows. A massive storm had rolled in, the one the forecasters had been warning about all week. "The bridge is likely flooded," he wrote. "The line is down, no cell service here either." "He'll come back," I whispered, panic rising. "Christopher, he'll come back to make sure I'm dead." Kyle's eyes sharpened. He held up a hand, a clear stop gesture. He walked to the window and looked out into the gray, swirling rain for a long moment. He was scanning the woodline, not like a hermit, but like a watchman. He came back to the bed and sat down. He looked directly at me, his gaze steady, and began to sign. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Who is he? Why did he shoot you?" The fact that he signed back, so fluently, so quickly, was the most comforting thing I had ever experienced. It was like he had reached directly into my terror and thrown me a lifeline. I told him everything. My voice was weak, so I switched to signing, my hands trembling with the effort. I told him about my mother, Christopher's debts, the cabin, the papers, the gun. I told him he'd left me for dead. As I signed, his face hardened. He was no longer just a kind, reclusive neighbor. I was watching a transformation. The air around him seemed to crackle with a quiet, compressed energy. When I finished, he nodded slowly. He picked up the whiteboard and wrote, "My full name is General Kyle Wallace. I served for 30 years. I am not just a medic." A general, a 3-star general. The title hit me with the force of a physical blow. The hermit was one of the most powerful men in the military. "You are not just a patient," he continued, his handwriting neat and precise. "You are a witness, and you are under my protection. This storm gives us an advantage. He thinks you are dead. He thinks he has time. He is wrong." This was the turning point. The fog of victimhood began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear focus of my host. He left the room and returned a minute later with a satellite phone. "This only works for encrypted military comms," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was the first time I'd heard him speak. It was clear he preferred to sign. "But it has one other function." He typed a message, his fingers flying, and hit send. "I have a friend. He is an investigator, the best. He will be here the moment the bridge is clear. He will find out everything about your stepfather." He then turned to me. "We have a clever trap, as you might say. Your stepfather thinks he's the only one with a plan, but he is an amateur. We are not." He explained his own secret. The land he lived on wasn't just a retreat, it was a fully secure compound. "After my injury," he signed, his movements sharp, "I lost my hearing, but I did not lose my sight. My property is monitored. I have cameras on the ridgeline. I was watching him leave your property." My heart hammered. "You saw him." "I saw his car," he signed. "I have the exact time he left. I have his license plate. But I did not see you, so I assumed it was a family visit, until you threw the rock. Your testimony is the bullet. My camera footage is the powder that fires it." He went to a closet and pulled out a heavy-duty laptop. He booted it up, typed in a series of complex passwords, and turned the screen to me. It was a secure server. "While you rest," he wrote on his board, "we will build our case. This man, Christopher, is a real estate developer, in debt." "Yes," I rasped, drowning in it. Kyle Wallace smiled, and it was a cold, sharp, terrifying smile. "Good. Men like that are not careful. They leave trails. My investigator will find that trail. You just rest, Freya. When your stepfather shows up to claim your property, we will be waiting." I lay back against the pillows, the pain in my side a dull throb, but the terror was gone. It was replaced by something new. Something I'd learned from the man sitting across from me. Resolve. I spent 2 days at General Wallace's home. The storm raged outside, a perfect cocoon of isolation. It was the strangest, safest period of my life. Kyle, he insisted I call him Kyle, was a meticulously organized caretaker. He changed my bandages, cooked simple, nourishing meals, and sat with me for hours, communicating through sign language and his whiteboard. We were 2 people fluent in a language the outside world had forgotten, and it forged an immediate, powerful bond. His investigator, a man named Harris, arrived on the 3rd morning, just as the rain subsided. He was a quiet, intense man in a rumpled suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He and Kyle spoke in the other room, their voices too low for me to hear. Harris left with the laptop and a grim, determined look. The news came fast. Christopher was, as I suspected, financially ruined. His development company was a house of cards built on fraudulent loans and bad investments. He was being investigated by the SEC, and he was days away from total collapse. My mother's estate was his last, desperate lifeline. "He's acting," Kyle signed to me, his hands moving with sharp precision. "He reported you missing yesterday. He told the local police you were despondent after your mother's death and wandered off from the cabin. He organized a search party for the news cameras. My stomach turned. He's playing the part of the grieving stepfather. Exactly, Kyle signed. He needs you declared legally dead to access the estate. His creditors are closing in. He has filed an emergency petition with the probate court, citing his role as executor and your fragile mental state. The hearing is in 2 days. 2 days, I sat up, the pull on my stitches making me wince. I'm not ready, I'm still. You are ready, Kyle said, his voice rumbling with authority. He handed me a set of clean clothes, a simple black sweater and jeans. Harris is handling the police. He's arranging for a state police escort to the courthouse. Your stepfather will not know you are there until it is too late. The morning of the hearing, I was terrified. My side ached, a constant reminder of what had happened. Kyle, however, was a portrait of calm. He wasn't wearing his flannel. He was dressed in his full, formal Class A Army uniform. The deep blue jacket was adorned with rows of ribbons, and on his shoulders, shining under the fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallway, were 3 silver stars. He was no longer Kyle, the reclusive neighbor. He was Lieutenant General Kyle Wallace. We sat in the back of the small courtroom, out of sight. I watched Christopher walk in. He was dressed in a somber dark suit, his face a mask of practiced grief. He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief as he conferred with his lawyer. He looked every bit the devastated family man. We are calling the emergency petition for the estate of Freya, the judge said, his voice tired. Christopher's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Christopher, is in a terrible position. His stepdaughter, Freya, has been missing for 5 days. Given her fragile state after her mother's passing, we fear the worst. Mr. Christopher, as executor of his late wife's will, is merely trying to protect the estate from the creditors. What creditors? The judge asked, peering over his glasses. My client has some minor business debts, Your Honor, and he wishes to settle the estate quickly too. That won't be necessary. The voice came from the back of the courtroom. It was mine. It was stronger than I expected. Christopher's head snapped around. His face, I will never forget that look. The color drained from it. The practiced grief vanished, replaced by a ghastly, primal shock. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Freya, he whispered, his jaw slack. I stood up, Kyle rising beside me, a towering, decorated pillar of indisputable authority. I walked down the aisle, my steps steady, my eyes locked on the man who had tried tea. Oh, murder me. I am not missing, Christopher, I said, my voice ringing in the silent room. I was sorting my mother's things. You came to the cabin. You told me to sign the papers to sell it, and when I refused, you shot me. The room erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order, order, Ms. Whoever you are, these are in. It's Freya, Your Honor, I said, stopping at the bar. And he shot me. He shot me in the side and left me to die in the woods. This is absurd, Christopher's lawyer shouted, finding his voice. My client is a respected businessman. This girl is clearly unwell. She's delusional. Christopher, recovering his composure, stood up. Freya, honey, what are you talking about? You're confused. You must have hurt yourself in the woods. Thank heavens you're alive. He tried to move toward me, his arms outstretched, the picture of a relieved father. Don't you touch me, I snarled. Your Honor, this is a baseless, hysterical accusation. His lawyer insisted. It is not, Kyle Wallace said. His deep voice silenced the room. He stepped forward, his ASL interpreter, provided by Harris, moving with him. The judge's eyes widened as he took in the uniform. General, Wallace, what is your involvement in this? Your Honor, Kyle said, his voice steady as his hands began to move, the interpreter speaking his words a half-second later. I am Freya's neighbor. I was at my home on the day in question. I am also the man who rescued her. He recounted the events with military precision. At 1432, I saw Mr. Christopher's vehicle, a silver sedan, license plate 2LK981, departing the property at high speed. At 15:04, I was alerted to a presence on my property line. I found Freya. She was bleeding profusely from a gunshot wound to her left abdomen. Christopher was shaking his head, his face pale. He's lying. They're in it together. She's manipulated him. Kyle Wallace held the judge's gaze. Freya was unable to speak, but she did not need to. My hearing was lost in combat, Your Honor. I communicate via American Sign Language. He turned, and in the dead silent courtroom, he looked at me, then at Christopher. He raised his hands. She signed to me, Kyle's interpreter said, his voice booming. She signed, help stepfather, shot me. The blood drained from Christopher's face. It was the one detail he could never have known. The one variable he never saw. His stupid, sentimental stepdaughter and the deaf hermit next door shared a language he didn't know existed. He's a liar, Christopher shrieked, his mask of sanity shattering. That's not proof. You can't prove any of this. It's my word against hers. We can, I said. I reached into my pocket, my hand closing around the phone I'd crawled for. The bullet passed through me, Your Honor, but it didn't just disappear. I placed the phone on the railing. I fell in the kitchen. The bullet lodged in the antique china cabinet my mother loved. The police, led by Mr. Harris's team, retrieved it this morning, along with the gun Christopher used, which he panicked and threw into a ravine 2 miles from the house. Christopher let out a sound, a low, strangled gasp. He looked at the phone, at Kyle's uniform, at my face, and he knew. The trap had snapped shut. The courtroom appearance was just the beginning. Christopher was arrested on the spot, his wild-eyed proclamations of a conspiracy falling on the deaf ears of the state troopers who cuffed him. But the fight wasn't over. He was a cornered animal, and his lawyer was slick. They immediately posted bail, paid by one of Christopher's few remaining shadowy investors, and the strategy shifted. Their defense was character assassination. They couldn't deny the bullet, the gun, or Kyle's testimony, so they tried to muddy the why. The narrative they spun was that I was an unstable, vindictive stepdaughter, furious that Christopher was managing my mother's mismanaged estate. They claimed the shooting was a tragic accident, that I had found the gun, threatened him with it, and in the ensuing struggle, it had gone off. It was a disgusting, desperate lie, but it planted a seed of doubt. He is trying to make you the antagonist, Kyle signed to me a week later. We were in his library, a warm room lined with books on history and military strategy. I was recovering there, feeling safer in his compound than I ever could at the cabin. It won't work, I signed back, though my hands trembled. It's his word against a 3-star general. He knows that, Kyle replied, his expression thoughtful. He isn't trying to win, he is trying to force a plea deal, to get the charge reduced from attempted murder to manslaughter or assault. He wants to survive. We cannot let that happen. The investigation, led by Harris, had exploded. With Christopher's arrest, his house of cards collapsed. The SEC froze his assets. The investors he defrauded came out of the woodwork. Harris was now drowned in evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. We have his finances, Harris reported to us, his tie undone, looking exhausted but exhilarated. The man was a vortex. He'd mortgaged the cabin, illegally, using a forged power of attorney from Freya's mother. The sale he was trying to force, it wasn't just to pay debts. It was to cover the fraudulent mortgage before the bank foreclosed and exposed the forgery. He needed Freya's signature on the new sale to pay off the old illegal loan. It was worse than I thought. He hadn't just tried to kill me for money. He'd tried to kill me to cover up a crime he'd already committed against my mother. But his lawyer is still arguing it was an accidental shooting, I said, my voice full of frustration. How do we prove intent beyond any doubt? Kyle looked at Harris. We need to find someone else he's hurt. A man this desperate, this arrogant. This is not his first time destroying a life to save himself. Find the others. Harris found her in 3 days. Her name was Elizabeth. She was the widow of Christopher's first business partner, a man who had died accidentally on a boating trip a decade earlier. Christopher, the sole beneficiary of their company's key man insurance policy, had walked away with millions, while Elizabeth was left with nothing. She's been trying to prove Christopher sabotaged the boat for 10 years, Harris explained. But she had no proof, and no one would listen. She's terrified of him. But when I told her he'd been arrested for attempted murder, she agreed to talk. The second confrontation was not in a courtroom. It was in a sterile deposition room. Christopher was there, looking gaunt and haggard, his expensive suit hanging off him. When I walked in, he flinched. But he wasn't there for me. A moment later, the door opened, and Elizabeth walked in. She was an older woman, her face etched with grief, but her eyes were like steel. Christopher's reaction was visceral. He leaped from his chair. What is she doing here? You can't, this is unrelated. Sit down, Mr. Christopher, the prosecutor said calmly. Elizabeth sat opposite him. She never took her eyes off his. Hello, Christopher, she said, her voice shaking but strong. You told me Robert's death was a tragic accident. You told me you tried to save him. I did, he stammered. Then why, she said, sliding a photograph across the table, did you buy a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands for the day after his funeral? A ticket you never used, because you found out the insurance policy would pay out after all. Christopher stared at the itinerary, his face ashen. And why, Harris's voice cut in, did you file an emergency petition to have your wife, Freya's mother, declared mentally incompetent just 3 weeks before she passed? A petition you withdrew when her doctors threatened to report you. They had found it, the paper trail of his cruelty. He hadn't just been impatient for my mother to die, he had actively tried to seize her assets while she was still alive. He has a pattern, the prosecutor said, addressing Christopher's lawyer. A pattern of targeting women, of isolating them, and of using accidents and legal loopholes to steal their assets. Elizabeth, Freya's mother, and finally, Freya. He leaned forward. This was not a struggle. This was not an accident. This was the final step in a long-running, sociopathic con, and this time he got caught. Christopher put his head in his hands. There were no more lies. The spell was broken. His lawyer just sighed and closed his briefcase. The trial was swift. Christopher's defense had collapsed. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Kyle's testimony, the ballistics, the financial crimes, and the damning pattern of behavior brought to light by Elizabeth, his lawyer had no choice but to plead guilty to attempted murder and a slew of fraud charges, hoping for mercy. The climax of our story wasn't the trial, it was the sentencing. But it wasn't in the courtroom. For me, the true, final showdown happened back at the cabin. I had to go back. I'd been avoiding it for weeks. Kyle had offered to have a cleaning crew go to erase the stains, but I knew I had to be the one to do it. It was the only way to reclaim the space. Kyle drove me. He hadn't left my side, becoming the protective father figure I'd never truly had. He waited on the porch, giving me space as I stepped inside. The bloodstain was still on the floor, a dark, ugly map of my crawl to the kitchen. The phone cord was still ripped from the wall. The cabin, my sanctuary, felt violated, haunted by the memory of Christopher's coldness. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the smell of old paper and pine. I had expected to feel terror. Instead, I just felt angry. He had taken so much. He had taken my mother's final years, her security, and he had tried to take my life and my home. I went to the kitchen and got a buck. Tea and a scrub brush. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing the floor when I heard a car. My heart stopped. I looked at Kyle on the porch. He was already on his feet, his hand instinctively going to the satellite phone on his belt. A car door slammed. It wasn't a police car, it was a taxi. And the person who got out was Christopher. He was out on bail just before his sentencing. He looked awful. He was thin, his hair was unkempt, and he was wearing a cheap tracksuit. He saw me, he saw Kyle, and he just smiled, a broken, empty smile. Freya, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He started walking toward the porch. Kyle stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. That's far enough, Christopher. What are you going to do? Shoot me? Christopher laughed, a terrible, rattling sound. I have nothing, you know that, right? You took it all. The money, the house, my reputation. It's all gone. I'm going to prison for 30 years. It's a life sentence. Good, I said, my voice shaking. It's less than you deserve. I just wanted to see it one more time, he said, his eyes scanning the cabin, the trees. She loved this place, your mother. She really, truly loved it, and she loved me. Don't you dare talk about her, I spat, stepping out from behind Kyle. It's true, he insisted, his eyes wild. She believed in me. We could have been happy. It was just the money. It was always the money. And you and this stupid, worthless house, it was always in the way. He took another step, and Kyle moved. I am telling you, son, to stay back. The word, son, hit Christopher harder than a slap. It was a dismissal. A final judgment from a man who represented everything Christopher failed to be: honor, strength, integrity. Christopher's face crumpled. The last of his bravado, his narcissistic pride, just evaporated. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a brilliant con man. He was just a weak, pathetic, greedy little man who had failed at everything. I have nothing, he whispered again, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. You've left me with nothing. This was the real him. Not the monster who shot me, but the hollow man who felt sorry for himself. And in that moment, I realized my triumph. It wasn't in the courtroom. It was right here on this porch. I looked at him, no longer with fear, but with a cold, clear pity. You're wrong, Christopher, I said, my voice strong and clear. You didn't lose anything because you had nothing. You had no honor, no love, no loyalty. You were empty. And you will go to prison and you will die just as empty as you are right now. I turned to Kyle. General, would you please call the police? He's violating his bail. Kyle smiled, a real, warm smile this time. He pulled out his phone. Christopher stared at me, his mouth open. He had come here for one last dramatic scene, one last attempt to inflict pain, and I had taken it from him. I had shown him the truth. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He just stood there, a hollow shell, and waited for the sirens. As the police car pulled up the gravel drive, he looked at me one last time. You were always smarter than her, he whispered. Yes, I said, I was. I watched them put him in the car. As it drove away, I turned, went back into the cabin, and finished scrubbing the floor until the last trace of him was gone. Christopher was sentenced to 35 years. With the combination of attempted murder, fraud, and the evidence from Elizabeth's case, the judge made it clear he would serve the vast majority of that time. His financial, social, and personal ruin was absolute. He was a forgotten man before the prison doors even closed. The weeks after the sentencing were quiet. The cabin, now clean and silent, felt like mine again. I finished my work, cataloging my mother's journals. Reading them now, I saw her strength, not just her vulnerability. I saw the doubts she'd had about Christopher, the notes she'd made, the small legal protections she'd tried to put in place. She had been fighting him in her own way, too. Kyle General Wallace became a fixture in my life. He was no longer the hermit, and I was no longer the grieving daughter. He was, by every definition that mattered, my family. He had used his vast network not just for the investigation, but for the aftermath. He'd found me the best trauma counselor, a lawyer who specialized in untangling the financial mess Christopher had made, and an editor at a university press who was interested in publishing my mother's historical papers. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the sentencing, Kyle and I were sitting on my porch, drinking tea. The air was cold, and the leaves were a riot of red and gold. Are you going to stay? He signed, gesturing to the cabin. I thought for a moment. I am, but I'm not going to hide here. I'm going to turn it into a writer's retreat, a place for people who need quiet, in honor of my mother. He smiled and nodded. That is a good plan. She would be proud. She would be proud of you, Freya, he continued, his hands moving gently. You were strong, you were brave. I was lucky, I signed back, my eyes stinging. I was lucky you were here. I was lucky you understood me. Kyle put his warm, solid hand over mine. He looked at me, his gaze direct and full of a father's pride. It was not luck, Freya, he signed. It was preparation. Your mother prepared you. She gave you a skill. You used it. Never mistake your survival for luck. He was right. Christopher had seen me as a soft, sentimental girl, an obstacle. He never bothered to look deeper. He never knew that I had a language he couldn't understand, a resilience he couldn't break, and a neighbor he couldn't intimidate. The cabin was no longer a tomb. It was a fortress. The woods were not a place of terror, they were a shield. And I was not a victim, I was a survivor. I had faced the worst of my past and had, with the help of an unlikely friend, built a new future. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, the silence of the woods peaceful and complete. Justice had been served. The wound in my side was a scar, but it no longer hurt. I was at peace.